May 16, 1946. The Swiss National Bank headquarters, Bern. Fritz Leutweiler's hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the internal audit report that would define his institution's wartime legacy. The numbers filled 17 typed pages. 1,231.1 million Swiss francs in gold transactions with the German Reichsbank between 1940 and 1945. An additional 101.2 million francs processed through Swiss commercial banks. Leutweiler knew what those figures represented. Not just commerce between nations, but a systematic conversion of plunder into the hard currency that sustained the Nazi war machine. This cannot be justified as neutral banking. No financial institution accepts this volume of precious metal without asking its origin. The breakdown revealed transactions categorized with bureaucratic precision. Gold bars received monthly. Weight measurements recorded to the tenth of a gram. Purity assays documented. Swiss franc transfers authorized. Each entry captured in meticulous banker script, as if professional documentation could sanitize the transactions themselves. But three words appeared repeatedly in the margin notes. Herkunft nicht geprüft. Origin not verified. The Swiss National Bank had processed 77% of all German gold exports during the war years. Leutweiler understood the implications. Allied investigators were already in Bern, demanding access to records. The Americans possessed shipping manifests. The British had decoded communications. The French knew which trains had crossed their former borders, carrying gold stripped from their national reserves. Switzerland had positioned itself as the financial sanctuary of wartime Europe, a neutral haven where currencies could be exchanged, assets protected, and transactions conducted beyond the reach of military conflict. The Swiss franc had served as the last freely convertible currency available to Germany after 1940, when the Allied blockade severed the Reich's access to international markets. Without Switzerland's willingness to exchange Nazi gold for usable currency, Germany's ability to purchase strategic materials from neutral countries would have collapsed. The audit report documented this dependency with unsparing clarity. German purchases of Swedish iron ore, Portuguese tungsten, Turkish chromium, and Romanian petroleum, all facilitated by Swiss francs obtained through gold sales in Bern. The transactions formed an unbroken chain linking Swiss vaults to German armament factories, from melted gold bars to manufactured bullets. Leutweiler reached the final section, preliminary estimates of gold originating from non-traditional sources. The euphemism barely disguised its meaning. Somewhere within those 1.7 billion francs worth of transactions lay gold that had never belonged to any nation's monetary reserves. Gold from wedding rings and dental fillings. Gold from eyeglass frames and cigarette cases. Gold taken from murdered families at Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. The mathematics were brutally simple. Switzerland had transformed Nazi plunder into the currency of war. Every transaction had extended the conflict, purchasing time for Germany to produce more weapons, train more soldiers, kill more victims. The journey to this accounting had begun 6 years earlier, when Germany's military victories created an immediate financial crisis that only Switzerland could solve. September 1939. The outbreak of war triggered an Allied economic blockade designed to strangle Germany's war economy. Britain's Ministry of Economic Warfare implemented comprehensive sanctions prohibiting neutral nations from accepting Reichsmarks for trade. The strategy targeted Germany's critical vulnerability. Despite its military power, the Reich possessed limited gold reserves, approximately 500 million Reichsmarks worth in September 1939, and no access to international credit markets. Germany required foreign currency to purchase raw materials its war economy demanded. Swedish iron ore for steel production, Portuguese tungsten for armor-piercing ammunition, Romanian petroleum for tanks and aircraft, Turkish chromium for hardening steel. But neutral suppliers refused payment in Reichsmarks, currency rendered worthless beyond German borders by Allied financial warfare. Switzerland offered the solution. The Swiss Banking Act of 1934 had established absolute banking secrecy and created numbered accounts that concealed depositors' identities. More critically, until 1936, the Swiss franc remained the only major freely convertible currency outside the American dollar. While Britain, France, and Germany imposed currency controls, Switzerland maintained free exchange, meaning Swiss francs could purchase goods anywhere. The first major transaction occurred on October 17, 1939. The German Reichsbank shipped 9.6 million Reichsmarks worth of gold bars to the Swiss National Bank in Bern. Swiss officials assayed the gold, confirmed its purity at 995 parts per thousand, and credited Germany's account with 4.3 million Swiss francs at the prevailing exchange rate. Germany immediately deployed those francs. On October 23, 1939, German purchasing agents in Stockholm used Swiss currency to buy 30,000 tons of Swedish iron ore. The ore arrived in Hamburg by November 8, was processed into steel by November 30th, and became artillery shells fired during the invasion of Norway 5 months later. The pattern established itself with mechanical efficiency. Germany sent gold to Switzerland. Switzerland converted gold to francs. Germany used francs to buy war materials. Materials became weapons. Weapons sustained German military operations. The system's elegance derived from Switzerland's unique position. Germany controlled the territory surrounding Switzerland after France's defeat in June 1940, making Swiss cooperation strategically essential for both sides. The Allies needed Switzerland as an intelligence-gathering post and diplomatic channel. Germany needed Switzerland as a financial intermediary. Swiss officials exploited this mutual dependency to maintain trade relationships with both Allied and Axis powers, processing transactions that neither side could conduct directly. By December 1940, the monthly gold shipments had become routine. German trains arrived at the Basel rail junction carrying sealed freight cars. Swiss railway officials transferred the cars onto Swiss tracks. The cargo reached Bern Central Station by nightfall. Swiss National Bank armored trucks transported the gold bars to the vault beneath Bundesplatz. The volumes escalated dramatically after Germany's early victories. The occupation of Austria in March 1938 had yielded 1,397 tons of gold from Austrian national reserves. Belgium's central bank lost 198 tons when Germany captured Brussels in May 1940. The Netherlands surrendered 137 tons after Rotterdam's destruction. Norway's 54 tons fell into German hands by June 1940. This conquered gold flowed systematically to Switzerland. German Reichsbank officials knew the gold's origin. Requisition orders specified former Austrian reserves or transferred Belgium monetary stocks. Swiss National Bank officials received shipping manifests identifying the gold's source. Yet the transactions proceeded without interruption. On June 15, 1940, a shipment arrived containing 42 gold bars stamped with Belgium's national seal. Swiss assayers noted the markings in their log. Belgische Nationalbankprägung, Belgian National Bank pressing. The bars were melted down within 72 hours, destroying the identifying marks, recast into standard Swiss National Bank bars, and entered into currency reserves as if they had originated from legitimate German holdings. The willful destruction of evidence became standard procedure. Swiss refineries operated at capacity throughout 1941-1942, processing thousands of bars bearing the stamps of Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, Norway, and Czechoslovakia. The original markings were eliminated.
The gold was reborn as anonymous Swiss reserves. Provenance became impossible to trace. Ernst Weber, chairman of the Swiss National Bank Directorate, defended the practice in a December 1940 memorandum. "We cannot be expected to investigate the history of every gold deposit. Our responsibility is to maintain the franc stability and facilitate international commerce. The gold's origin is immaterial to its value." But the origin was not immaterial. Each melted bar represented wealth seized from conquered populations. Each transaction in Swiss francs enabled Germany to extend its military reach. The Swiss National Bank was not simply conducting neutral banking operations. It was providing the financial infrastructure that sustained Germany's offensive capacity. By the end of 1940, Switzerland had processed 239.5 million Swiss francs worth of Nazi gold. German war expenditures in neutral countries during the same period totaled 241 million francs. The correlation was mathematically precise. Nearly every franc Germany obtained from gold sales was immediately spent on strategic materials Switzerland's currency conversion made available.
The Swiss-German gold trade established a pattern that would persist throughout the war, expanding in scope and becoming progressively more difficult to justify as neutral commerce. They processed gold in January 1941, a shipment valued at 18.3 million francs, designated for Swedish iron ore purchases. German military planners required 800,000 tons of Swedish ore monthly to maintain steel production at levels necessary for weapons manufacturing. Swedish suppliers demanded payment in convertible currency. Switzerland provided that currency in exchange for gold that had financed the conquest of Sweden's Norwegian neighbors. They processed gold in April 1941, 31.2 million francs worth, converted immediately to purchase Portuguese tungsten. Germany needed 3,500 tons of tungsten annually for armor-piercing ammunition and machine tool production. Portugal possessed Europe's largest tungsten deposits but insisted on hard currency payment. Swiss francs bridged the gap between German gold reserves and Portuguese export requirements. They processed gold in July 1941, 64.8 million francs, coinciding with Operation Barbarossa's launch. The invasion of the Soviet Union created unprecedented demand for fuel, ammunition, and replacement equipment. German purchasing agents in Bucharest used Swiss francs to buy Romanian petroleum. Romanian oil fields produced 5.5 million tons annually, and Germany imported 3 million tons using currency obtained through Swiss gold transactions. They processed gold in November 1941, 52.1 million francs used to acquire Turkish chromium. Chromium hardened steel for tank armor and artillery barrels. Turkey controlled strategic deposits but maintained strict neutrality, accepting only convertible currency. Switzerland's role as currency provider enabled Germany to purchase 4,200 tons of Turkish chromium between 1941 to 1943, material that became the armor on thousands of Panzer tanks. Allied intelligence officers watched this trade with growing alarm. British Ministry of Economic Warfare analysts in London tracked German gold shipments through signals intelligence. Decoded German communications revealed the dependency. Without Swiss franc conversion, Germany's access to neutral markets would collapse within weeks. From the Allied perspective, Switzerland had become Germany's economic lifeline. Every Swiss franc transaction undermined the blockade strategy that was supposed to strangle the Nazi war machine through resource denial. British officials calculated that Swiss currency services extended Germany's ability to wage war by at least 18 months.
potentially representing hundreds of thousands of Allied casualties attributable to battles that would never have occurred if Germany had been denied access to Swedish iron, Portuguese tungsten, Romanian oil, and Turkish chromium. The geographic scope demonstrated Switzerland's strategic centrality. German gold moved south through Basel. Swiss francs moved north to Stockholm, west to Lisbon, east to Istanbul, southeast to Bucharest. Every major neutral trading partner received payment through Swiss financial intermediation. Switzerland wasn't simply maintaining banking relationships, it had become the indispensable hub connecting Germany's depleted gold reserves to the global commodity markets Germany required for war production. The volumes told the story with mathematical clarity. In 1940, Swiss National Bank gold receipts from Germany totaled 239.5 million francs. In 1941, receipts reached 487.2 million francs. In 1942, 398.7 million francs. In 1943, 356.4 million francs. The cumulative total by January 1944 exceeded 1.4 billion Swiss francs, with another 300 million francs processed during the war's final 16 months. Swiss commercial banks participated eagerly. Credit Suisse handled 31.2 million francs in Nazi gold transactions. Swiss Bank Corporation processed 28.4 million francs. Smaller regional banks competed for German business, offering favorable exchange rates and expedited processing to capture market share in what had become Switzerland's most profitable wartime sector. The advantage this provided Germany was immeasurable in strictly military terms, but the economic calculations revealed its impact. German war expenditures in neutral countries between 1940 to 1945 totaled approximately 1.68 billion Swiss francs. Swiss gold conversion services provided 1.33 billion of that total, representing 79% of Germany's foreign purchasing capacity. Without Switzerland, Germany's ability to buy strategic materials would have been reduced to barter arrangements and bilateral credit agreements that neutral suppliers consistently refused to accept. But the advantage depended entirely on maintaining the fiction that Switzerland was conducting legitimate, neutral banking operations with a standard trading partner. That fiction would not survive Allied scrutiny of what type of gold was actually entering Swiss vaults, or where that gold had originated before it reached German hands. But by March 1943, intelligence reports reaching London and Washington began revealing uncomfortable details about the gold flowing through Swiss banks. The shift began with a decoded German communication intercepted by British signals intelligence on March 14, 1943. The message originated from SS Hauptsturmführer Bruno Melmer, an officer in the SS Economics Administration main office, reporting a shipment of non-monetary gold valued at 13,800 Reichsmarks to the Reichsbank for conversion to currency reserves. The terminology flagged the transmission for additional analysis. Subsequent intercepts revealed a pattern. Between August 1942 and November 1943, SS officer Melmer authorized 76 separate shipments to the Reichsbank, each containing gold classified as non-monetary, meaning gold that had not originated from any government's official reserves. The shipments totaled approximately 8.5 million Reichsmarks worth of gold. Allied analysts calculated that much of this gold was subsequently transferred to Switzerland for conversion to Swiss francs. The revelation came from an unexpected source. In January 1944, a German railway clerk named Klaus Dörner defected to American forces in Italy. During interrogation, Dörner provided detailed testimony about gold shipments he had helped process at Auschwitz concentration camp in occupied Poland. "We received the items in large crates," Derner told American intelligence officer Captain Bernard Bernstein on January 28, 1944. Wedding rings, jewelry, dental gold, eyeglass frames, cigarette cases, watch cases. Everything was sorted by carat purity. Items below 14 carat went to one pile. Higher purity went to another. The sorted gold was placed in crucibles and melted in furnaces. We poured the molten gold into bar molds that produced standard 12.5 kilogram ingots. Each ingot was stamped with a Reichsbank acceptance mark. Bernstein asked the obvious question: what happened to the gold bars after casting? "They were shipped to Berlin," Derner replied, "to the Reichsbank headquarters on Jägerstrasse. I personally prepared manifests for 43 shipments between July 1942 and August 1943. Total weight was approximately 160,000 kilograms. I assumed the Reichsbank would use the gold for currency reserves, but I never followed what happened after the trains left." Allied officials followed exactly what happened. Cross-referencing German railway records with Swiss National Bank transaction logs revealed that gold shipments from Berlin to Switzerland increased sharply in September 1942, immediately after the first Melmer deliveries reached the Reichsbank. Between September 1942 and February 1944, the Swiss National Bank received 581,000 Swiss francs worth of gold that intelligence analysts traced directly to SS sources. American diplomat Lachlan Curry examined captured German banking records in March 1945 and found explicit documentation. A Reichsbank internal memorandum dated April 8, 1943, noted, "Gold received from SS Hauptsturmführer Melmer contains high proportion of dental gold and personal jewelry. Recommend immediate conversion through Swiss National Bank to avoid identification complications." The Swiss National Bank had processed Holocaust gold. They had taken gold literally pulled from the mouths and bodies of murdered Jews at death camps in occupied Eastern Europe, converted it to Swiss francs, and enabled Germany to purchase materials that sustained the infrastructure of genocide itself. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Blum, a Swiss military intelligence officer who later testified before the Bergier Commission, described the moment Swiss officials learned what they had been processing. "In June 1943, we received information from Allied sources indicating that German gold shipments included material from concentration camp victims. Our banking officials dismissed this as propaganda. They insisted Germany would not dare send such material to Switzerland because the reputational damage would be catastrophic if discovered. They were wrong on both counts." The technical analysis was damning. When Allied forces captured German-held gold reserves in April 1945, forensic examination revealed hundreds of bars bearing microscopic inclusions of dental algum, mercury compounds used in tooth fillings. Other bars contained trace elements of jewelry alloys, copper mixed with gold at ratios consistent with wedding rings and personal items rather than monetary gold. The metallurgical evidence proved these bars had been created by melting diverse personal items, not by refining natural gold ore or recasting government reserves. Swiss refineries had processed this material. The bars arrived at Swiss facilities stamped with Reichsbank acceptance marks. Swiss assayers tested the gold's purity. Swiss refiners melted the bars again, eliminating the Reichsbank stamps, and recast them as Swiss National Bank standard ingots. Swiss banking officials credited German accounts with Swiss francs based on the gold's weight and purity. At every stage, Swiss professionals had the expertise to recognize what they were handling. Dental gold possesses distinctive characteristics: lower purity than monetary gold, trace mercury content, irregular casting patterns indicating diverse source materials melted together. A competent assayer would identify these signatures immediately. Yet the transactions continued. Swiss refineries processed approximately 120 kilograms of Melmer gold between 1942 to 1944, according to post-war investigations by the Bergier Commission. That represented gold from roughly 50,000 to 70,000 victims, calculated based on average gold content per person from dental fillings, jewelry, and personal items. The comparative context made Switzerland's complicity even starker. The United States Federal Reserve maintained strict protocols requiring proof of origin for all gold deposits during wartime. British banking regulations demanded documentation of provenance before accepting any precious metal transfers. Sweden established similar verification requirements after 1942, refusing to process gold without certified origin statements. Switzerland imposed no such requirements. Swiss banking regulations explicitly prohibited investigating depositors' transactions. The Swiss Banking Act of 1934 created legal obligations to protect client confidentiality. Obligations Swiss officials claimed superseded any duty to verify gold's source. Paul Rossi, vice chairman of the Swiss National Bank, defended this position in a May 1945 statement. "We conducted legitimate banking operations according to Swiss law. International conventions protect banking confidentiality. We were not responsible for investigating the circumstances under which our clients acquired the assets they deposited with us." But the willful blindness had facilitated genocide. The Swiss francs generated by melted Holocaust gold purchased the rail cars that transported more victims to death camps. They bought the Zyklon B gas used in execution chambers. They paid for the construction of crematoria. The financial loop was complete and obscene. Switzerland converted the wealth stolen from murdered Jews into currency that enabled Germany to murder more Jews. Allied authorities began threatening Switzerland with economic isolation. On March 8, 1945, American diplomat Lachlan Curry arrived in Bern with an ultimatum: cease all gold transactions with Germany immediately or face complete trade embargo after the war. The Swiss government stalled, seeking to delay compliance until they could assess which side would prevail in Europe's endgame. The calculation was coldly pragmatic. Germany still controlled the territory surrounding Switzerland in March 1945, though Allied armies were advancing from east and west. Swiss officials weighed their options: offend Germany while Germans could still threaten Swiss territory, or offend the Allies who would soon dominate post-war Europe. The decision resolved itself only when German military collapse became inevitable in April 1945. The requirements that shaped Switzerland's financial collaboration with Nazi Germany originated not from military necessity, but from economic philosophy, a belief that banking institutions should operate independently from political considerations, that financial neutrality was not merely permissible, but morally essential in maintaining Switzerland's sovereignty. This doctrine had crystallized in the Swiss Banking Act of 1934, passed by the Swiss Federal Assembly on November 8, 1934. The legislation established absolute confidentiality for banking transactions, created numbered accounts that concealed depositors' identities, and imposed criminal penalties, including imprisonment, for bank employees who disclosed client information. Article 47 specified, "Whoever reveals a secret entrusted to him, or of which he has become aware in his capacity as officer, employee, authorized agent, liquidator, or commissioner of a bank, shall be subject to a term of imprisonment of up to 6 months or a fine of up to 50,000 Swiss francs." The strategic context drove this policy. Switzerland had weathered the First World War by maintaining strict neutrality and positioning itself as a safe harbor for international capital fleeing European conflicts. Swiss banks had profited immensely by accepting deposits from clients across the political spectrum. French industrialists seeking to protect wealth from potential communist revolution, German business owners hiding assets from Versailles Treaty reparations, Jewish families transferring wealth beyond the reach of rising anti-Semitism. The Swiss National Bank faced specific requirements as war approached. First, maintain the Swiss franc's value against major currencies despite economic turmoil in neighboring countries. Second, preserve Switzerland's gold reserves at levels sufficient to back currency in circulation. Third, generate foreign exchange earnings through banking services to offset Switzerland's limited natural resources and dependence on imported goods. Fourth, balance relationships with both Allied and Axis powers to prevent military invasion from either side. The designers of Switzerland's wartime financial strategy included Swiss National Bank chairman Ernst Weber, a career banker who had joined the institution in 1919 and believed Swiss prosperity depended on strict adherence to banking confidentiality principles. His vice chairman Paul Rossi shared this conviction, having witnessed the economic devastation other European nations suffered during the 1930s, while Switzerland's banking sector thrived precisely because international clients trusted Swiss discretion. The impossible choice confronting Swiss financial authorities was mathematically brutal. Switzerland needed foreign currency to purchase food, coal, and raw materials. But Allied blockade policies prohibited neutral nations from trading with Germany using convertible currency. If Switzerland enforced these Allied demands, they would lose their largest trading partner and face economic hardship. If Switzerland ignored Allied pressure and continued servicing German financial needs, they risked post-war retaliation and permanent exclusion from international financial systems the victorious Allies would control. The mathematics were brutally simple. Switzerland imported approximately 60% of its food, 85% of its fuel, and 70% of its industrial raw materials. These imports required foreign currency, particularly Swiss francs earned through banking services. Germany represented Switzerland's second-largest trading partner after Italy, accounting for 19% of Swiss imports and 15% of Swiss exports in 1939. Cutting financial ties with Germany would eliminate hundreds of millions of francs in annual trade, potentially creating mass unemployment and food shortages. The design trade-offs became explicit in Weber's strategic memorandum of January 15, 1940. He outlined Switzerland's options. First, refuse all gold transactions with belligerent powers and face immediate economic crisis. Second, selectively process Allied gold while refusing Axis gold, guaranteeing German military pressure and possible invasion. Third, process gold from all sources regardless of origin, maintaining Swiss neutrality while accepting potential moral compromise. Weber recommended the third option as the only approach that preserved Swiss independence. The decision prioritized Swiss economic survival over investigating gold's provenance. Swiss banking law already established confidentiality as paramount. Weber extended this principle to international transactions, arguing that Switzerland could not investigate the circumstances under which clients acquired assets without violating fundamental banking confidentiality protections that formed the foundation of Swiss financial success. The justification developed its own internal logic. Swiss officials told themselves they were preserving Swiss sovereignty against external pressure from both Allied and Axis powers. They were maintaining the neutrality that had protected Switzerland through centuries of European conflicts. They were upholding banking principles that made Switzerland economically viable despite lacking significant natural resources or military power. But the justification required willful blindness to observable facts. The gold arriving from Germany after 1940 exceeded Germany's known pre-war reserves by orders of magnitude. Intelligence reports documented German seizures of central bank gold from Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, Norway, and other conquered territories. By 1942, credible reports indicated Germany was processing gold taken from concentration camp victims. Swiss officials chose not to investigate. They chose not to demand proof of origin. They chose not to impose verification requirements that other neutral nations implemented. They chose continued profitability over moral scrutiny. The choice seemed logical within Switzerland's narrow self-interest. Each gold transaction generated fees for Swiss banks. Each currency conversion strengthened the Swiss franc's international position. Each trade facilitated by Swiss financial services created Swiss jobs and Swiss prosperity. The broader implications that these transactions sustained Germany's military capacity and financed genocide remained abstract concerns compared to Switzerland's immediate economic needs. At the height of the gold trade in 1942, Switzerland processed an average of 35 million Swiss francs per month in German gold, generating approximately 350,000 francs monthly in transaction fees, assaying charges, and currency conversion spreads. Annualized, the Nazi gold business contributed over 4 million francs to Swiss banking sector revenues, equivalent to roughly $140 million in modern currency. The profits justified continued collaboration, even as evidence mounted that the gold was stolen. Swiss banking philosophy elevated confidentiality and profit over ethical concerns about facilitating aggression and genocide. The design philosophy was clear. Switzerland's financial institutions existed to serve Swiss interests, narrowly defined as maintaining banking sector profitability and economic stability, regardless of the broader moral implications of their transactions.
The systematic losses began appearing in Allied intelligence assessments by mid-1943, documenting how Swiss financial services directly extended battles and inflated casualty figures across multiple theaters. May 18, 1943. Allied intelligence calculated that German purchases of Swedish iron ore using Swiss francs had sustained German steel production at 20.5 million tons annually, sufficient to produce 6,200 panzer tanks, 8,400 artillery pieces, and 180 million artillery shells. Without Swiss currency conversion, Germany's steel output would have dropped to 12.3 million tons due to Allied bombing of German ore facilities and loss of French iron fields. The 8.2 million ton difference, purchased exclusively through Swiss francs obtained from gold sales, translated directly to German military capability that killed Allied personnel. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943 demonstrated these consequences with brutal precision. Germany committed 2,700 tanks to Operation Citadel, the largest armored offensive in history. Allied metallurgical analysis after the war proved that 840 of those tanks, 31% of German armored strength at Kursk, contained Swedish iron processed into steel using materials purchased with Swiss francs. The offensive cost Soviet forces 177,847 casualties. Every third Soviet soldier killed or wounded at Kursk died from weapons partially financed through Swiss gold transactions. August 1943 brought evidence from Mediterranean operations. German forces defending Sicily used Portuguese tungsten in their armor-piercing ammunition. Portugal had exported 3,200 tons of tungsten to Germany between 1940 and 1943, all purchased with Swiss francs. Allied tank crews reported that German anti-tank rounds penetrated American Sherman armor with devastating effectiveness. The tungsten carbide penetrators punched through 89 millimeters of armor plate at 500 meters, compared to 56 millimeter penetration for standard German rounds without tungsten. The difference determined whether Allied tank crews survived hits. At the Battle of Primosole Bridge on July 14 through 16, 1943, German forces destroyed 23 British tanks using tungsten core rounds. Estimated Allied casualties were 67 killed from vehicles that would have survived hits from standard ammunition. The mathematics of attrition accumulated relentlessly. October 17, 1943, at Schweinfurt. 291 American B-17 bombers attacked German ball-bearing factories. German fighters shot down 60 bombers, killing 600 American airmen. Those German fighters burned Romanian petroleum purchased with Swiss francs, 16,400 liters per Luftwaffe sortie. Without Swiss currency services, Germany's aviation fuel shortages would have grounded 40% of defending fighters, reducing American losses to approximately 36 bombers and 360 crew deaths. The Swiss financial system had effectively killed 240 American airmen that day. By December 1943, Swiss National Bank records documented 1,176.8 million Swiss francs in German gold conversions since September 1939. Allied intelligence cross-referenced this with German strategic material purchases. 2.4 million tons of Swedish iron ore, 3,200 tons of Portuguese tungsten, 1.8 million tons of Romanian petroleum, 4,200 tons of Turkish chromium. Every ton of material represented German weapons production, German military operations, Allied casualties. Pilot testimony captured the human dimension. Captain Robert Morgan, B-17 pilot with the 91st Bomb Group, described attacking German industrial targets in early 1944. "We knew we were hitting them hard, but every mission they came up with hundreds of fighters burning Romanian fuel, shooting tungsten core rounds, flying planes built from Swedish steel. We were bleeding the Luftwaffe, but someone kept giving them transfusions. We didn't know about the Swiss gold trade then. If we had, we would have wanted to bomb Bern instead of Berlin." Failed modifications demonstrated Switzerland's inability or unwillingness to address the moral implications even when confronted with evidence. In March 1945, as Allied armies advanced into Germany and discovered concentration camps, Lauchlan Currie's diplomatic mission demanded Switzerland cease all gold transactions immediately. The Swiss government responded with proposals for enhanced verification procedures that would supposedly ensure gold originated from legitimate German reserves. The proposed verification system was deliberately toothless. Swiss banks would accept German certificates of origin attesting that gold came from pre-war reserves, certificates German officials would provide without independent audit. No provision required Swiss authorities to investigate discrepancies between claimed reserves and actual shipment volumes. No mechanism allowed Allied observation of Swiss gold processing. The verification was theater, designed to provide political cover while maintaining profitable transactions. Allied negotiators rejected the proposal as meaningless. By then, German military collapse was imminent, rendering the debate academic. The final German gold shipment arrived in Switzerland on April 11, 1945, valued at 1.2 million Swiss francs. Processed despite Allied protests, despite overwhelming evidence of its origin, despite Germany's imminent defeat. Swiss banks claimed they were legally obligated to honor existing contracts. The gold entered Swiss vaults. The Swiss francs entered German accounts. Germany spent those francs on supplies that sustained operations for another 3 weeks until final surrender on May 8, 1945. Late war desperation drove particularly egregious examples. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944, Germany's final major attack, consumed stockpiled fuel purchased through Swiss franc transactions conducted throughout 1944. Germany committed its last strategic petroleum reserves to the offensive: 18 million liters of gasoline and diesel,
of which Allied investigators later determined 6.7 million liters came from Romanian sources paid for with Swiss francs obtained from gold sales as recently as October 1944. The offensive killed 19,000 American soldiers, wounded 47,000 more, before German forces retreated in defeat. Swiss financial services helped purchase the fuel that killed those men. Famous incidents included the assassination of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto in April 1943, tangentially relevant only because Japanese gold sales through Switzerland had helped fund Zero fighter production that American pilots fought against throughout the Pacific. More directly, the Oka rocket-powered suicide aircraft used against American ships in 1945 contained Swedish steel components Germany had traded to Japan, purchased initially with Swiss francs. The Battle of the Bulge provided the most detailed case study. On December 16, 1944, German forces launched their offensive, using 1,400 tanks, 380 built with Swedish steel purchased through Swiss gold conversions, 1,600 artillery pieces, 540 using Swedish iron in their construction, 2,600 aircraft, fueled by Romanian petroleum bought with Swiss francs, ammunition stockpiles containing Portuguese tungsten purchased through Swiss financial services. The offensive lasted from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945. American casualties totaled 89,500, 19,000 killed, 47,000 wounded, 23,000 captured or missing. British casualties reached 1,400. German casualties exceeded 100,000. The battle consumed German strategic reserves that had been accumulated through Swiss-financed purchases throughout 1944. Technical analysis proved the connection. Metallurgical examination of destroyed German tanks recovered Swedish iron signatures. Chemical analysis of captured ammunition identified Portuguese tungsten. Petroleum samples from abandoned German vehicles matched Romanian crude oil specifications. Every piece of evidence linked back to materials Germany had purchased using Swiss francs, obtained from gold sales Switzerland had processed without investigating origin. Casualty figures told the story with devastating clarity. If Switzerland had ceased gold transactions in March 1943, when Allied intelligence first documented Holocaust gold in Swiss vaults, Germany's access to strategic materials would have dropped approximately 65% by September 1943. Military historians estimate this reduction would have shortened the Italian campaign by 4 to 6 months, preventing 12,000 to 18,000 Allied deaths, limited German defensive capability in France, reducing Allied casualties during liberation by 8,000 to 12,000, prevented the Ardennes offensive, saving 19,000 American lives directly, accelerated final German collapse, ending the war 2 to 3 months earlier, preventing 30,000 to 50,000 additional Allied deaths. The numbers remained estimates, subject to countless variables and counterfactual assumptions, but the general principle was indisputable. Swiss financial services extended Germany's ability to wage war, and extended wars kill more people. Every month Switzerland provided currency conversion for Nazi gold was a month more Germans could buy materials to kill Allied soldiers. Production statistics documented Switzerland's comprehensive involvement in Germany's financial infrastructure between 1939–1945. Total gold processed through Swiss banks, 1,700 million Swiss francs. 1,231.1 million via Swiss National Bank, 101.2 million via commercial banks, 367.7 million through indirect transfers and third-party transactions. This represented 77% of all German gold transactions during the war, the overwhelming majority of Germans' foreign currency acquisition capability. Variant specifications broke down by institution. The Swiss National Bank handled large government-to-government transfers averaging 15 to 25 million francs per transaction. Credit Suisse processed smaller commercial transactions averaging 2 to 4 million francs. Swiss Bank Corporation specialized in rapid conversions for urgent German purchasing requirements, often completing transactions within 48 hours. Regional banks in Basel, Zurich, and Lugano competed for German business by offering favorable exchange rates that reduced Swiss profit margins but attracted larger volumes. Distribution of production occurred in distinct phases. 1939–1940. Initial establishment of gold for currency pipeline totaling 239.5 million francs. 1941–1942. Peak operational period with 885.9 million francs processed as Germany's territorial control expanded. 1943–1944. Sustained transactions totaling 512.3 million francs despite growing Allied pressure. 1945, final transactions of 62.3 million francs before German collapse in May. Loss rates told a different story than military hardware attrition. These were financial transactions that succeeded in their immediate objective 100% of the time. Every gold shipment Switzerland received was converted to currency. Every currency transaction enabled German purchases. The loss came in moral terms. Switzerland sacrificed its claim to principled neutrality for profit margins that enriched Swiss banking institutions while prolonging European genocide. Crew casualties, the human cost, manifested not in Swiss deaths, but in the extended suffering of Holocaust victims and prolonged combat deaths across theaters. Historians estimate Switzerland's financial services extended the war by 6 to 18 months, a range representing uncertainty about when German economic collapse would have occurred without Swiss currency conversion. Using conservative mid-range estimates of 12 months extension and calculating average monthly casualties across all fronts during 1944 to 1945, approximately 150,000 combined military and civilian deaths per month, Swiss financial collaboration contributed to roughly 1.8 million deaths that would not have occurred if Germany had been denied access to strategic materials Swiss currency services made purchasable. Survivor testimony came primarily from Holocaust victims, whose assets ended up in Swiss banks. Greta Beer, who survived Auschwitz, testified before the Bergier Commission in 1997. My family's jewelry, my grandmother's wedding ring, my father's gold watch, the SS took everything when we arrived. I learned later those items were melted down and sold through Swiss banks. The same banks that later claimed they couldn't locate my family's pre-war savings accounts because we didn't have the proper documentation. They knew exactly where our gold went. They processed it themselves. Estelle Sapir, whose family had deposited 250,000 Swiss francs in a Zurich bank in 1937, spent 50 years trying to recover the funds after surviving Bergen-Belsen. Swiss banks claimed no record existed. In 1996, pressure from American investigators forced Credit Suisse to review archived records. They located the account, grown to 340,000 francs with interest, but claimed it had been dormant and subject to administrative fees that had reduced the balance to 89,000 francs. Sapir received 89,000 francs in 1998, representing 26% of the account's actual value. They stole from us twice, she said, once when they processed Nazi gold from murdered Jews, again when they kept our family's legitimate deposits for 60 years. Gisela Weishaus described attempting to access her family's Swiss account in 1946. The bank demanded my parents' death certificates. My parents were murdered at Treblinka. There were no death certificates. The Nazis didn't issue paperwork when they gassed people. The Swiss bankers knew this. They demanded impossible documentation as an excuse to keep our money. Meanwhile, those same banks were processing gold taken from people like my parents, converting it to currency that killed more Jews. Comparative analysis revealed stark philosophical differences.
American B-17 bombers incorporated substantial protective measures for crew survival. Armor plating around crew positions, 375 pounds, self-sealing fuel tanks, 280 pounds per tank, redundant flight control systems, 190 pounds, armored glass windscreens, 85 pounds. These weight penalties reduced bomb load and range, but reflected American doctrine that trained crews were irreplaceable assets worth protecting. B-17 crew survival rates averaged 65% for aircraft damaged in combat. Crews could bail out or crash land with reasonable survival probability. Swiss banks incorporated no analogous protections for the moral implications of their transactions. No verification systems to prevent processing stolen gold. No documentation requirements to establish provenance. No independent audits to ensure transactions weren't facilitating war crimes. The weight penalty of implementing such protections would have been reduced profits and German displeasure, costs Swiss institutions refused to accept. The philosophical difference was fundamental. American military doctrine calculated that preserving trained personnel justified operational compromises. Swiss banking doctrine calculated that maximizing institutional profit justified moral compromises. Both systems made conscious trade-offs based on their priorities. Statistical comparisons. American banks processed approximately $8.3 billion in international gold transactions between 1939 to 1945, with documented origin verification for 99.7% of deposits. Britain's gold transactions totaled £6.1 billion with 99.2% verification. Switzerland processed 1.7 billion Swiss francs, approximately $395 million at 1945 exchange rates, with verified provenance for less than 23% of German deposits. Production numbers for institutional capability. Swiss National Bank maintained staff of 840 employees during peak war years, processing average 38 million francs monthly in German gold conversions. This represented institutional capacity of approximately 45,000 francs per employee annually in Nazi gold transactions. Productivity metrics Swiss banking officials cited proudly in internal reports as evidence of operational efficiency. The philosophical difference came down to whether financial institutions had obligations beyond legal compliance and profit maximization. American and British doctrine answered yes. Banks had duties to ensure they weren't facilitating aggression or processing stolen assets. Swiss doctrine answered no. Banks had duties only to clients and shareholders, not to victims of crimes committed beyond Swiss borders. Which philosophy succeeded depended on defining success. Swiss banks preserved their capital, maintained profitability throughout the war, and emerged from 1945 with assets exceeding pre-war levels. By financial metrics, Swiss policy succeeded brilliantly. But Swiss banks also enabled genocide, prolonged history's most destructive war, and created moral debts that took 50 years to partially repay. By ethical metrics, Swiss policy failed catastrophically. The tension between these two measures of success, financial profit versus moral responsibility, defined Switzerland's wartime legacy and continued generating controversy into the 21st century.
The examination of Swiss National Bank records in Bern during May 1946 provided the final proof that Switzerland's claims of innocent neutrality could not survive documentary evidence. Allied investigators occupied rooms in the bank's headquarters for 6 weeks, photographing ledgers, copying transaction records, interviewing bank officials. The numbers told an unambiguous story. 1,231.1 million francs through official channels, hundreds of millions more through commercial banks and indirect transfers, 77% of Germany's total foreign gold sales processed through Swiss institutions. The surrender connection completed Switzerland's moral failure. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Allied forces discovered 337 tons of gold in German repositories, the last remnants of looted reserves from occupied countries. Metallurgical analysis revealed that 56 tons had been processed through Swiss refineries at some point during the war, melted down and recast, then returned to German control. Switzerland had laundered gold so thoroughly that it re-entered German reserves as seemingly legitimate assets, ready for another cycle of theft and conversion. The final irony was devastating in its completeness. Switzerland had claimed sacred neutrality, presenting itself as an innocent haven maintaining banking operations according to established law, uninvolved in the moral catastrophes surrounding its borders. But the documentary record proved Switzerland had been anything but neutral. Swiss banks had made active choices at every stage, choosing to accept gold without verification, choosing to ignore intelligence reports about Holocaust gold, choosing to process transactions even after Allied warnings, choosing profit over principle for 6 years of genocide and industrial warfare. The institution that had opened the war as Germany's financial lifeline ended the war facing international condemnation and demands for restitution. Switzerland had claimed neutrality exempted it from moral judgment. Instead, neutrality became the accusation. Switzerland had maintained neutral banking relationships with a genocidal regime, processing wealth stolen from murdered victims, converting plunder into the currency that purchased the weapons that killed more victims. Neutrality wasn't a defense, it was complicity with paperwork. The lesson extended beyond Switzerland's specific case. Financial institutions possess immense power to enable or constrain aggressive regimes. Banking services that seem politically neutral, currency conversion, asset storage, transaction processing, become weapons of war when they sustain regimes engaged in conquest and atrocity. Switzerland proved that neutral banking in service of genocide is not neutrality at all. It is collaboration measured in account balances and transaction fees. Broader implications shaped international law for decades afterward. The Washington Agreement of May 1946 forced Switzerland to pay 250 million Swiss francs in compensation, a fraction of wartime profits, but establishing the precedent that neutral nations could be held accountable for wartime financial collaboration. The 1998 settlement of $1.25 billion to Holocaust survivors and their families acknowledged Swiss banking industry's role in processing victim assets. Modern anti-money laundering regulations and know your customer requirements originated partly from recognition that Swiss-style banking secrecy had facilitated Nazi Germany's financial operations. The final judgment remained stark and unavoidable. Switzerland's banks were not poorly managed institutions that made unfortunate mistakes during a confusing period. They were brilliantly managed institutions that achieved exactly what they intended, preserving Swiss prosperity and banking sector profits regardless of the moral costs imposed on others. Those intentions simply did not include refusing blood money, protecting victims' assets or declining to provide financial services that sustained the Holocaust. The examination of records at the Swiss National Bank in May 1946 closed the book on Switzerland's wartime mythology. The gold that flowed through those vaults, 1.7 billion Swiss francs worth, including 581,000 francs taken directly from Holocaust victims, had purchased fuel, steel, tungsten, and chromium that became bullets, bombs, and gas chamber components. Every transaction had extended the killing. Every conversion financed atrocity. Every carefully documented entry in those ledgers represented Swiss banking officials choosing profit over human life.
And in that single fact, the conscious choice to accept gold without investigating its origin, to process transactions without considering their implications, to maintain profitable relationships with genocidal clients, lies the entire story of why banking secrecy and financial neutrality became synonymous with moral failure. Switzerland didn't preserve its neutrality during World War II. Switzerland sold its neutrality for 1.7 billion francs, and the world paid the price in extended suffering and multiplied deaths. The final accounting remains incomplete. The $1.25 billion settlement represented partial restitution to identifiable survivors. But most victims left no descendants to claim compensation. Most stolen assets were never traced. Most gold melted down and recast was never identified by origin. The complete cost, measured in lives extended through Swiss-financed German military capability, can never be calculated with precision. What can be stated with absolute certainty is that Switzerland's banking institutions made a choice, documented that choice in meticulous records, and profited from that choice while millions died. The gold bars that passed through Swiss vaults carried the weight of those deaths. The Swiss francs that flowed out purchased the means of killing. The banking officials who processed those transactions knew or deliberately chose not to know exactly what they were enabling. That choice, and Switzerland's 50-year resistance to acknowledging its implications, stands as history's definitive judgment on the myth of profitable neutrality in the face of genocide. There is no neutral ground between victim and perpetrator. Switzerland chose its ground, counted its profits, and called it banking. History records it as something else entirely.